The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the dusty storage facility on the outskirts of Phoenix, casting harsh shadows across rows of metal doors. Marcus Chen clutched his final crumpled $10 bill, watching other bidders circle like vultures around Unit 247. He hadn't eaten in 3 days, but something about this abandoned storage unit called to him. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the strange way the auctioneer avoided eye contact when describing its contents. "All right, folks, let's get this show on the road," the auctioneer called out, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Unit 247, abandoned for 6 months, contents unknown. Starting bid is $10. Marcus felt his heart pound against his ribs. $10, exactly what he had left in the world. Around him, the other bidders, weekend warriors hoping to strike it rich on someone else's misfortune, shifted impatiently. Most wore clean clothes and drove pickup trucks loaded with moving equipment. Marcus wore the same threadbare jeans and torn flannel shirt he'd been living in for weeks. $10, he called out, his voice cracking slightly from dehydration. A heavy-set man in a cowboy hat glanced at Marcus with disdain. 15. Marcus's stomach clenched. He couldn't go higher. This was it. His last roll of the dice before he'd have to face another night on the streets with absolutely nothing. But as he looked at the partially visible contents through the gap under the storage unit door, something made him hesitate. He caught a glimpse of glass tanks, maybe 20 or 30 of them, stacked and covered with tops. Aquariums. "Going once for 15, the auctioneer announced. What Marcus didn't tell anyone was that before losing everything, he'd been Dr. Marcus Chen, marine biologist and former Navy intelligence officer. Before the gambling addiction destroyed his career, his marriage, and eventually his life, he'd spent 15 years studying marine ecosystems and another 5 working covert operations that often involved following money trails through legitimate businesses. Going twice. 20, Marcus blurted out, immediately regretting it. He didn't have $20. He was betting money he didn't possess on a storage unit full of what looked like abandoned fish tanks. The cowboy hat man waved dismissively. "Kid's bluffing. Let him have it." Sold for 20 to bidder number 47. Marcus's legs felt weak. He walked up to the auctioneer on unsteady feet, handed over his $10 bill, and somehow managed to convince the man to accept an IOU for the remaining 10. Maybe it was the way Marcus's hands shook, or maybe the auctioneer just wanted to move on to more profitable units. But 5 minutes later, Marcus found himself standing alone in front of Unit 247, with bolt cutters and a flashlight borrowed from the facility manager. The metal door rolled up with a grinding screech, revealing the musty interior. Dust motes danced in the beam of his flashlight as he stepped inside. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, maybe 12 by 15 feet, and it was packed floor to ceiling with aquarium equipment, glass tanks of various sizes, filtration systems, pumps, artificial coral decorations, and boxes labeled with scientific names in what looked like Latin. Marcus ran his fingers along the edge of the nearest tank, a massive 150-gallon setup that would have cost thousands of dollars when new. The glass was covered in dust, but the construction was professional grade. These weren't hobby aquariums. They were the kind of high-end systems used by research facilities or exotic fish dealers. When he pried open those dusty aquarium tanks, his trained eye immediately spotted what others missed. GPS coordinates etched into the fake coral cryptocurrency wallet addresses hidden in the filtration systems, and a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as an exotic fish importation business. His blood ran cold as the pieces fell into place. The coordinates weren't random. They pointed to specific locations throughout the Southwest. The wallet addresses were embedded in QR codes printed on fake plant decorations, and the business documents scattered throughout the storage unit told the story of Aquatic Imports LLC, a company that had been importing rare tropical fish from South America at a rate that would have required tanks the size of football fields. Marcus had stumbled onto something massive. During his intelligence days, he'd seen operations like this. elaborate fronts designed to move huge amounts of money across international borders. But this was different. The scale was enormous, and someone had gone to incredible lengths to hide the evidence. As he photographed everything with his cracked phone, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The storage facility seemed too quiet now, the fluorescent lights too bright. He worked quickly, documenting each piece of evidence while his mind raced through the implications. The mob had been looking for their missing $120 million for 2 years. Now, a homeless man with nothing left to lose held the key to the biggest heist in Arizona history. But how long could he stay alive once they realized their secret was out? Marcus stared at the rusty padlock hanging from the storage unit like a metal tumor. Unit 247. His $10 had bought him whatever nightmare waited behind that corrugated steel door, and there was no backing out now. The auctioneer had moved on to the next lot, his voice echoing through the concrete corridors of Riverside storage. The bolt cutters felt heavier than they should have as Marcus approached his purchase. 3 other bidders had glanced at the unit's contents through the partially raised door and walked away shaking their heads. He'd caught glimpses of what looked like glass tanks stacked floor to ceiling, covered in dusty tarps. Probably someone's failed pet store inventory or a hoarder's aquarium obsession. The padlocks snapped with a metallic ping that seemed to ricochet off every surface. Marcus rolled up the door, wincing at the screech of metal on metal. Stale air rushed out, carrying the smell of dust and something else, something chemical and sharp that made his nose burn. The unit was crammed with aquariums of every conceivable size. 10-gallon tanks sat atop massive 100-gallon monsters. Some still had gravel and fake plastic plants inside, others were bone dry with calcium deposits streaking their glass walls like abstract art. Fluorescent light fixtures hung at odd angles, their bulbs long dead. It looked like an underwater graveyard. Marcus stepped inside, his footsteps crunching on scattered aquarium gravel. This was it. This was what his last $10 had bought him, a storage unit full of worthless fish tanks that he couldn't even sell for scrap. The glass was too old, too scratched, too specialized. Even the equipment looked ancient. He kicked at a pile of air pumps and cursed under his breath. Behind him, he could hear the auction continuing, the auctioneer's voice growing fainter as the crowd moved to units further down the corridor. Soon, he'd be alone with his stupidity. But something nagged at him as he surveyed the mess. The chemical smell was stronger near the back of the unit, and there was an odd precision to how some of the larger tanks were arranged. They weren't just stacked, they were positioned, deliberately. Marcus squeezed between 2 massive tanks toward the rear wall. That's when he noticed the numbers. Small, precise digits etched into the glass corners of specific aquariums. Not serial numbers, those would be on metal plates or stickers. These were hand-carved, barely visible unless you were looking for them. The first tank he examined had 40.7589 carved into its front right corner. The one next to it read 74.0060. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Coordinates. They had to be coordinates. He pulled out his phone and checked the battery. 12%. Enough for now. Opening the map app, he input the first set of numbers. The pin dropped on a location in the downtown warehouse district. The second set pointed to a spot near the industrial waterfront. Marcus's hands trembled as he moved from tank to tank, finding more numbers. Dozens of them, each set of coordinates marking a different location throughout the city. But coordinates to what? The answer hit him when he reached the largest aquarium at the very back of the unit. This one was different, pristine, expensive, with a custom hood that looked recently installed. The coordinates etched into its base pointed to an address Marcus recognized. 1247 Industrial Boulevard. The old Castellano fish processing plant. Everyone in the city knew that story. Vincent Castellano had run the plant as a front for money laundering until the FBI raided it 6 months ago. But Castellano had vanished the night before the raid, along with rumors of missing money. Lots of missing money. Marcus's breathing became shallow. The chemical smell was strongest near this tank, and now he realized why. It wasn't just any chemical, it was the smell of money. Old bills processed and treated and hidden away. With shaking fingers, he examined the tank's false bottom. The base was too thick, too heavy. He found a hidden latch near the back corner and pressed it. The bottom panel slid away to reveal a waterproof compartment packed with vacuum-sealed bags. Inside the first bag, stacks of $100 bills and a handwritten note in faded ink. If you're reading this, then Vincent is probably dead, and you're either very lucky or very unlucky. Each tank has a location. Each location has a cache. Total value approximately $120 million. Trust no one. The Torino family will kill anyone who gets between them and this money. Good luck. Marcus dropped the note as if it were on fire. The Torinos, Christ, they weren't just another crime family, they were the crime family. The kind of people who made entire bloodlines disappear for owing them $50. But $120 million. He could disappear too. Not the violent kind, the good kind. New identity, new life, somewhere far from this city where he wouldn't have to choose between food and shelter. A car door slammed somewhere outside the storage facility. Then another. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Through the gap under the unit door, he could see shadows moving across the pavement, multiple figures walking with purpose. Someone else knew about the aquariums. Marcus stared at the aquariums until his eyes burned, searching for anything that might explain why someone would pay good money to store empty glass boxes. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made the tanks look like tombstones in the cramped storage unit. He ran his fingers along the edges of the nearest aquarium, feeling for hidden compartments or false bottoms. Nothing. The glass was thick, commercial grade, the kind used in expensive pet stores or marine research facilities. Each tank bore a small brass nameplate, Coral Garden, Deep Blue, Paradise Reef. Fancy names for empty boxes. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, followed by voices. Marcus froze, listening. The voices faded, but his pulse remained elevated. He needed to think this through logically. Someone had paid rent on this unit for years. The lock was expensive, professional. This wasn't some amateur operation. He pulled out his phone's flashlight and examined each tank more carefully. The third one from the left caught his attention. Unlike the others, this one had a thin layer of dried salt residue coating the bottom. Real salt, not the artificial stuff. Someone had actually used this tank for saltwater fish. Marcus tilted the tank toward the light. Beneath the salt residue, scratched into the glass bottom in tiny letters, were numbers. 41.8781 minus 87.6298. His breath caught. Those looked like coordinates. He checked the other tanks methodically. The fifth tank contained a small piece of coral wedged behind the rear panel, and when he worked it loose, he found a waterproof bag taped to its underside. Inside was a single key and a business card for Neptune's storage solutions with an address on the south side. The seventh tank held the real treasure, a smartphone sealed in another waterproof bag. The phone was dead, but when Marcus found the charging cable coiled beneath a fake rock, his hands trembled with anticipation. While the phone charged, he Googled the coordinates on his own device. They pointed to a location in Lake Michigan, about 3 miles offshore from Navy Pier. Deep water, the kind of place where things disappeared forever. The stored phone finally powered on. No security code. Whoever owned it hadn't expected it to be found by anyone smart enough to look this carefully. The photo gallery contained dozens of underwater shots, a sunken yacht, its name clearly visible on the stern, Maria's Dream. In several photos, Marcus could make out waterproof cases stacked in the yacht's cabin, their contents obscured by murky water and marine growth. His hands shook as he scrolled through text messages from 2 years ago, names he didn't recognize discussing the transfer and cleanup. One message thread made his blood run cold. Carbone won't wait much longer. Tell him the location dies with me. Vincent says otherwise. Vincent can go to hell. Insurance policy is in place. The last message, sent 3 days later. If you're reading this, they got me. Everything you need is in the fish tanks. Good luck. Marcus sat back on his heels, the phone heavy in his palm. Carbone, even someone who lived on the streets knew that name. Anthony Carbone, the man who ran everything illegal from the docks to downtown. If Carbone was looking for something, and that something was sitting on the bottom of Lake Michigan, he did quick math in his head. A yacht that size could easily hold several million in cash, maybe more. And apparently, Carbone didn't know exactly where it was, or he would have retrieved it already. Another car door slammed outside, closer this time. Marcus quickly powered down the phone and shoved it into his jacket pocket along with the key and business card. He had to get out of here. But first, he needed those coordinates. Using his own phone, he photographed the numbers scratched in the tank bottom, then deleted his search history. Whatever game he was playing now, he couldn't afford to leave digital breadcrumbs. As he prepared to leave, voices echoed from the direction of the facility's main office. Two men, their conversation carrying clearly in the still air. Unit 247. Owner stopped paying rent 6 months ago, but somebody's been asking questions. What kind of questions? The kind that get people hurt. Marcus felt ice in his veins. Unit 247. He glanced at the number stenciled on his door. This was 247. He quickly closed the roll-up door but didn't lock it. The sound of the lock clicking might carry. Instead, he slipped between the rows of storage units, using the shadows to mask his movement. Behind him, he heard the distinctive rattle of his unit's door being rolled up. Son of a bitch. Someone's been here. Recently? Phone's still warm. Marcus pressed himself against the side of a unit 3 rows over, barely breathing. In his pocket, the dead man's phone felt like it weighed 100 pounds. He had stumbled into something that had already gotten people killed, and now Carbone's men knew someone else was involved. The question was no longer what the aquariums contained. It was whether Marcus would live long enough to find out what rested in the depths of Lake Michigan. Marcus crouched behind a dumpster in the alley behind Sal's storage, his heart hammering against his ribs. The black sedan had been circling the facility for the past 20 minutes, its occupants scanning every corner with predatory patience. Through the chain-link fence, he could see his storage unit, number 47, standing open like a gaping mouth. The aquarium he'd taken sat heavy in his backpack, the glass panels wrapped in his only clean shirt. He'd spent the morning studying every inch of it in the abandoned warehouse where he'd slept, running his fingers along the seemingly random scratches on the bottom panel. What had looked like normal wear from gravel and decorations now seemed deliberate, too precise, too patterned. A car door slammed. Marcus peered around the dumpster and watched 2 men emerge from the sedan. The driver was tall and lean, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. His companion was built like a refrigerator, all bulk and menace stuffed into an expensive suit. They approached the storage facility's office with purposeful strides. Marcus recognized the type immediately. During his years on the street, he'd learned to read danger in a man's walk, in the way his jacket hung, in the coldness behind his eyes. These weren't bill collectors or repo men. These were the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. The facility manager, a sweaty man named Bill who Marcus had dealt with during the auction, emerged from the office. Even from 50 yards away, Marcus could see the fear creeping across Bill's face as the 2 men flanked him. The conversation was brief and one-sided. Bill's hands shook as he pointed toward the back row of units. Marcus slipped deeper into the alley, using a delivery truck as cover while he circled toward the rear of the property. His mind raced through his options, each one bleaker than the last. He could run, had gotten good at running over the years, but where? He had no car, no money except the handful of bills from pawning the plastic decorations, and nowhere to hide that these men couldn't eventually find him. The back fence had a hole cut in it, probably by kids looking for a shortcut. Marcus squeezed through, ignoring the sharp metal that tore at his jacket. He needed to see what was left in that storage unit, needed to understand what he'd stumbled into before he could figure out how to survive it. Storage Unit 47 stood in the back corner, its metal door rolled up to reveal the remaining aquariums. Marcus, counted 12 tanks of various sizes, arranged in what he now realized wasn't random placement at all. The larger tanks formed a rough perimeter, with the smaller ones clustered in specific groupings inside. He pulled out the aquarium from his backpack and set it on the ground, comparing its dimensions to the empty spaces between the remaining tanks. It fit perfectly into a gap in the second row, and suddenly the arrangement made sense. It was a map, a three-dimensional representation of something, with each tank marking a specific location. The sound of approaching footsteps sent Marcus scrambling behind a tall tank in the back corner. The two men from the sedan entered the unit, their voices carrying clearly in the confined space. 12 left, the tall one said, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. Means someone already took one. Storage manager says only one bidder showed up, the refrigerator replied. Some homeless guy named Marcus Webb, paid $10 for the whole lot. Marcus's blood turned to ice. They knew his name. Somehow they'd already identified him, which meant running wouldn't help. They'd hunt him down wherever he went. Webb, the tall man repeated thoughtfully. Vincent Torelli's old accountant. I thought he was dead. Apparently not. Question is, does he know what he's got? The tall man knelt beside one of the aquariums, running his fingers along its base in the same way Marcus had done that morning. These scratches. Torelli was always too clever for his own good. Even from prison, he's still causing us problems. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. Vincent Torelli. He knew that name from the news. A mob accountant who'd been murdered in federal prison 2 years ago, supposedly by rival inmates. But if these men were looking for something Torelli had hidden, boss wants this wrapped up clean, the refrigerator said. Find Webb, find the missing tank, eliminate any loose ends. We'll canvass the pawn shops first. Homeless guy needs money, he'll try to sell whatever he took. When we find where he went, we find him. The two men began photographing the remaining aquariums from multiple angles, documenting their positions before carefully loading them into the sedan. Marcus remained frozen behind the large tank until their footsteps faded and the car drove away. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, his hands trembling as he realized the true magnitude of his situation. He wasn't just homeless and desperate anymore. He was a dead man walking, marked for execution by people who killed as casually as others swatted flies. But he had something they needed, and that might be the only thing keeping him alive. Marcus fumbled with the rusted padlock on storage unit 247, his hands trembling not from the cold morning air but from exhaustion. He'd spent the night in the McDonald's parking lot, dozing fitfully in the driver's seat of his borrowed Honda while keeping one eye on the storage facility. Every shadow seemed to move with purpose. Every distant sound made his pulse spike. The lock clicked open, and he rolled up the metal door just enough to slip inside. The aquarium stood like silent sentinels in the dim light filtering through the gap. 27 glass boxes that had somehow become his salvation and his curse in the span of 12 hours. He pulled out the crumpled paper from his jacket pocket, the one with his hastily scrawled notes from the previous night. Tank third, N40.7589W73.9851. He'd looked it up on his phone using the McDonald's Wi-Fi. Central Park. The coordinates pointed to somewhere near the reservoir. Marcus approached the third aquarium, running his fingers along its edges until he found the hidden compartment again. Inside, beneath the false bottom, lay a small metal cylinder no bigger than a pill bottle. His hand shook as he unscrewed the cap. A key fell into his palm. Small, brass, with numbers etched into its surface, 1847. Safety deposit box, he realized. Someone had been very careful about keeping their secrets scattered. A vehicle rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Marcus killed his phone's flashlight and pressed himself against the back wall of the unit. Through the gap under the door, he watched a black SUV cruise slowly past the storage facility entrance. It didn't stop, but something about its deliberate pace made his skin crawl. He needed help. The kind of help that didn't involve the police or questions he couldn't answer. Marcus thought of his sister Jenny, living her clean suburban life 3 states away, blissfully unaware that her homeless brother had stumbled into what felt like a death sentence. He couldn't drag her into this. But there was someone else. Someone who owed him a favor from the old days, before the drinking, before the job loss, before everything fell apart. 20 minutes later, Marcus sat across from Danny Voss in a diner that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1975. Danny was a private investigator now, specializing in insurance fraud and cheating spouses, but 15 years ago he'd been Marcus's partner in the accounting firm. Back when Marcus had covered for Danny's gambling debts and kept him from losing everything. "You look like hell," Danny said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Feel worse than I look." Marcus slid the photograph across the scarred Formica table. It showed the aquarium room, but he'd been careful to crop out any identifying details. "I need to know what this is worth." Danny studied the image with professional interest. "Aquariums? Maybe a few $100 if they're in good condition." "Why?" "Not the tanks. What's in them?" Marcus hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed Danny the decoded coordinates. "Each tank has information hidden inside. Locations. I think they lead to something valuable." "Marcus." Danny's voice carried a warning. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Before Marcus could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We know you have them. 24 hours to return what's ours or your sister Jenny has an accident. We know where she works." The blood drained from Marcus's face. He'd been so careful not to contact Jenny, but somehow they'd connected the dots anyway. Danny leaned forward, reading Marcus's expression. "Who's threatening you?" "I don't know." The words came out as a whisper. "But they know about Jenny. Show me." Marcus handed over the phone. Danny read the message, his jaw tightening. Professional. Vague enough to avoid direct threats, but specific enough to be terrifying. "Whoever sent this isn't playing games." He looked up. "What did you take?" Marcus made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "I bought a storage unit at auction yesterday. Found something inside that belongs to some very dangerous people. Now they want it back. Then give it to them." "I can't." "Not yet." Marcus thought about the key burning a hole in his pocket, about the $120 million that might be within his reach. "I need to know what I'm dealing with first. How much leverage I have." Danny was quiet for a long moment, studying his old friend's face. Finally he sighed. "Insurance company I work for has connections with law enforcement. I can make some discreet inquiries, but Marcus, if this is mob money or drug money, you're in way over your head." "I know." Marcus stood up, leaving a $5 bill on the table. "But I'm already drowning. Might as well see if there's treasure at the bottom." As he walked toward the door, Danny called after him. "Where are you going?" "To check a safety deposit box." The morning air felt electric with possibility and danger as Marcus stepped back onto the street, unaware that across the parking lot someone was photographing his license plate. Marcus pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the abandoned warehouse, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid night air. The sound of footsteps echoed through the alley behind him, growing closer with each passing second. He clutched the crumpled piece of paper he'd found hidden beneath the Angel fish tank's false bottom, its cryptic numbers and coordinates now burned into his memory. The footsteps stopped. Marcus held his breath, counting the seconds. 10, 20, 30. Just when he thought they'd moved on, a gruff voice cut through the silence. "I know you're here somewhere, you piece of trash. You can't hide forever." The voice belonged to Vincent Torino, the man whose photograph Marcus had seen in the newspaper clipping, tucked inside the aquarium's filter. The article had been brief but telling. Local businessmen questioned in connection with waterfront robbery. The date was 3 years old, and Marcus realized he'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than he'd imagined. A rat scurried across Marcus's feet, and he bit down hard on his tongue to keep from making noise. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth as he heard footsteps resume, this time moving away from his hiding spot. He waited another full minute before daring to peek around the corner. The alley appeared empty. but Marcus knew better than to trust appearances. These weren't street thugs or desperate addicts he was dealing with. These were professionals who killed for a living, and they wanted what he'd found in those aquariums. The storage unit had yielded more than just that one clue. Hidden throughout the collection of tanks were dozens of pieces to an elaborate puzzle, bank routing numbers etched into decorative coral, safety deposit box keys taped inside filter housings, and addresses written in UV-reactive ink on what appeared to be blank index cards. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating this treasure map, and they'd done it well enough to keep it hidden for 3 years. Marcus made his way through the maze of back alleys, using skills he'd developed during 18 months on the streets. He knew which dumpsters offered the best cover, which fire escapes provided quick escape routes, and which shadows were deep enough to conceal a man desperate enough to disappear. His destination was a 24-hour diner 6 blocks away, a place where the night shift waitress, Ruby, had shown him kindness when kindness was rare. More importantly, it was a place with multiple exits and good sightlines to the street. If Torino's men found him there, at least he'd see them coming. The neon sign flickered erratically as Marcus approached, casting intermittent red light across the empty parking lot. Through the windows he could see Ruby wiping down tables, her grey hair pulled back in its usual practical bun. The sight of something familiar and safe made his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. "Marcus, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's got you spooked?" He slid into a booth near the back, positioning himself where he could watch both the front entrance and the rear exit. "Ruby, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Have you seen any strangers around here tonight? Men in expensive suits asking questions?" Her weathered face creased with concern. "As a matter of fact, yes. 2 men came in about an hour ago, showed me a photograph, asked if I'd seen you." She poured him coffee without being asked, her hands steady despite the gravity of her words. "I told them I'd never seen you before in my life." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude mixed with fear. Ruby had protected him, but that also meant she was now involved, whether she realized it or not. These weren't the kind of men who forgot faces or forgave interference. "Ruby, you need to listen to me very carefully. Those men are dangerous, and I mean really dangerous. After tonight, if anyone else comes around asking about me, you tell them the truth. You tell them everything. Don't try to protect me, because it won't help me and it might get you hurt." She studied his face for a long moment, then nodded. "What kind of trouble are you in, Marcus?" Before he could answer, headlights swept across the diner's windows. A black sedan pulled into the parking lot, moving slowly, deliberately. Marcus recognized the license plate from earlier that evening when he'd first spotted them outside the storage facility. "That kind of trouble," he whispered, already moving toward the kitchen. "Ruby, get down behind the counter and stay there until they leave." The bell above the door chimed again, and Marcus heard Ruby's cheerful voice greeting the new customers. "Evening, gentlemen. What can I get you?" Marcus pushed through the kitchen's swinging doors, his heart hammering against his ribs. The puzzle was far from complete, but he was beginning to understand its scope. $120 million didn't just disappear. Someone had hidden it, and someone else had killed for it. Now it was his turn to run. The first drop of rain hit Marcus's windshield as he pulled into the parking lot of the Riverside Motel. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting intermittent red light across the cracked asphalt. He'd chosen this place specifically because it was the kind of establishment that asked no questions and kept no detailed records, just cash up front and a key to a room that had seen better decades. Marcus parked behind the building, tucked between a rusted dumpster and an abandoned shopping cart. The Honda's engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound besides the increasing patter of rain on the roof. He sat in the darkness for 10 minutes, watching for any signs of movement, any indication he'd been followed. Nothing but empty windows and puddles forming under broken streetlights. The aquarium sat in his passenger seat like a rectangular mystery. Under the dome light, the glass panels revealed nothing new, just the same pattern of seemingly random scratches that had gotten Eddie Torino killed. Marcus had memorized every mark, every tiny imperfection, but the code remained stubbornly opaque. Room 127 smelled like decades of cigarettes and disinfectant. Marcus triple-locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle before placing the aquarium on the sagging bed. The overhead light buzzed and flickered, casting unstable shadows that made the scratches seem to shift and dance. He pulled out his phone and studied the photos he'd taken of all 24 aquariums before leaving the storage unit. Each tank bore similar markings, but they varied in number and position. Some had only 3 or 4 scratches, others were covered with dozens of tiny marks. There had to be a pattern, a logic that would reveal where Vincent Romano had hidden his fortune. A car door slammed somewhere outside. Marcus froze, listening. Footsteps on gravel moving closer. He killed the lights and moved to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. A woman struggled with grocery bags as she headed toward the motel office, her umbrella battling the wind. False alarm. Marcus returned to the bed and switched on the small bedside lamp. In the softer light, he began organizing the photos by the number of scratches per tank. Tank 1, 7 marks. Tank 2, 12 marks. Tank 3, 4 marks. As he arranged them in sequence, a possibility began to emerge. What if the scratches weren't coordinates or a map? What if they were numbers? He grabbed the motel's complimentary pen and notepad. If each scratch represented a single digit, then the first tank's 7 scratches could simply mean 7. But that seemed too obvious for a man as paranoid as Vincent Romano. The mob accountant had hidden $120 million. He wouldn't use such a simple code. Marcus tried a different approach. What if the position of the scratches mattered? He studied the first photo closely. 3 scratches clustered near the bottom left corner, 2 in the center, 2 more near the top right. Could it be coordinates, longitude and latitude broken down into components? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Marcus stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. 30 seconds later, it buzzed again. Same number. This time he answered, but said nothing. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The voice was calm, almost conversational. Marcus didn't recognize it, but the slight accent suggested Eastern European origins. "We know you have something that belongs to Mr. Romano's associates." "I don't know what you're talking about." "The storage unit, Unit 237. We spoke with Mr. Torino before his unfortunate accident. He was very cooperative once we explained the situation." Marcus's blood chilled. They'd tortured Eddie before killing him. "Even if I knew what you were talking about," Marcus said carefully, "I'm not Eddie. I'm nobody. I don't have anything worth killing for. Everyone is somebody to someone, Mr. Chen." They knew his name. Marcus felt the walls of the motel room closing in around him. How had they identified him so quickly? "You have 24 hours, the voice continued. "There's a pier at Miller's Marina, slip 47. Come alone tomorrow night at midnight. Bring what you found, and we can discuss a reasonable finder's fee for your trouble. And if I don't, then we'll visit your sister Jennifer. She has a lovely apartment on Oak Street. Her daughter just started kindergarten, I believe." The line went dead. Marcus's hands shook as he set down the phone. They'd done their homework. Jenny was his only remaining family, and her 5-year-old daughter Emma was the closest thing to pure joy in his world. The thought of these men anywhere near them made his stomach twist with rage and terror. But they'd also made a mistake. By giving him 24 hours, they'd revealed something important. They needed him to solve the code. If they could have cracked themselves, they would have simply taken the aquariums and killed him. Marcus looked back at the photos spread across the bed. Somewhere in these scratches lay the key to Vincent Romano's hidden fortune, and now he had less than a day to find it. The warehouse district stretched before Marcus like a concrete maze, each building identical to the next in their industrial anonymity. He pulled the stolen sedan behind a row of shipping containers, the engine ticking as it cooled in the pre-dawn darkness. His hands trembled as he reached for the crumpled paper where he'd transcribed the coordinates from the aquarium bases. 3 locations, 3 chances to find whatever Tommy Castellano had hidden before the Kozlov brothers found him. The first address led to a defunct textile factory, its windows boarded and tagged with graffiti. Marcus circled the building twice, before parking in an alley that reeked of rotting garbage and broken dreams. The lock on the service door had been cut recently, metal shavings still bright against the rust. Inside, his flashlight beam cut through dusty air thick with the smell of machine oil and decay. The coordinates led him to a section where massive industrial looms sat silent, their metal frames casting twisted shadows. He counted off the measurements from the northeast corner, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Nothing. Just concrete floor and 20 years of accumulated debris. Marcus felt panic rising in his throat. Had he misread the numbers? Were the coordinates in a different format than he'd assumed? He rechecked his notes, the flashlight beam wavering with his shaking hands. Everything matched what he'd found etched into the aquarium bases. A sound from outside froze him in place, car doors slamming, voices speaking in what sounded like Russian. He killed the flashlight and pressed himself against one of the looms, heart hammering so loud he was certain they'd hear it from the street. Footsteps crunched on gravel, moving around the building's perimeter. A beam of light swept past the broken windows above. Marcus forced himself to count to 100 before moving. When he finally crept to a side window, the alley was empty, but fresh tire tracks marked the dirt beside his hiding spot. They were close, too close. The second location was across town, a shuttered auto repair shop in a neighborhood where every third building stood empty. Marcus approached more carefully this time, parking 6 blocks away and cutting through backyards and side streets. The coordinates here led to a hydraulic lift bay, and he found himself crawling beneath rusted equipment with a penlight clenched between his teeth. Again, nothing. Desperation gnawed at him as he checked and rechecked the measurements. The numbers were right, he was certain of it, but there was no hidden panel, no buried cache, nothing but oil stains and mouse droppings. Either Castellano had moved whatever he'd hidden, or Marcus was missing something fundamental about how the system worked. Dawn was breaking as he made his way to the third location, a converted brewery in the arts district that had been abandoned when the developer ran out of money. This time, he saw the black Mercedes parked 2 blocks away, Dmitry Kozlov's distinctive profile visible through the windshield. They were systematically checking the same locations, which meant they'd either broken Elena or found their own way to decode Castellano's system. Either way, Marcus was running out of time and options. He circled wide, approaching the brewery from the rear, through a tangle of overgrown lots and forgotten alleys. The building's back entrance hung open, and he could hear voices echoing from somewhere inside. Russian again, but also English. They had help now. Marcus slipped inside through a broken loading dock, moving like a ghost through shadows that smelled of hops and failure. The voices were coming from the main brewing floor, and he caught fragments of conversation as he crept closer. Third set of coordinates. Nothing at the other 2. Bastard was clever. He reached a catwalk overlooking the main floor and saw them. 3 men with flashlights, measuring and searching just as he had. But unlike Marcus, they had equipment. Metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, tools that made his penlight and ruler seem pathetic. And they were finding something. One of the men called out in excitement, his detector beeping rapidly near what had once been the main fermentation tank. The others converged, and Marcus watched them pull up loose floorboards to reveal a metal case nestled in a waterproof cavity. His heart sank as they opened the case and began examining its contents. Stacks of cash, from what he could see, along with what looked like documents and maybe jewelry. One of Castellano's caches, but clearly not the big one. The man who seemed to be in charge, not one of the Kozlov brothers, someone new, shook his head in obvious disappointment. They'd found something, but not everything, which meant there were more locations, more coordinates hidden in those aquarium bases that Marcus had missed or misunderstood. As the men began to pack up their find, Marcus backed away from the catwalk. He needed to get back to those aquariums, needed to study them more carefully. But first, He had to escape this building without being seen. The sound of his phone buzzing nearly made him cry out. A text message from Elena. "They have me. Don't trust anyone. Check the water levels." The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a stack of mouldering cardboard boxes, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he watched two men circle the aquarium like predators examining wounded prey. Their flashlight beams cut through the gloom, occasionally illuminating faces he didn't recognize, new players in this deadly game. "It's got to be here somewhere," the taller one muttered, his voice carrying a slight Brooklyn accent. Santini wouldn't have kept those fish tanks for decoration. Marcus's hand instinctively moved to the crumpled piece of paper in his jacket pocket, the one containing the decoded coordinates from the first aquarium. He'd memorized the numbers, but somehow having the physical evidence felt like holding on to hope itself. The location pointed to somewhere in Queens, but he needed more pieces of the puzzle before making his move. The shorter man knocked on the glass of the remaining aquarium, producing a hollow echo that made Marcus's skin crawl. Maybe we're overthinking this. What if the old man hid it in plain sight? Nah, Joey. This Santini character was smart, kept the feds guessing for 3 years before he disappeared. The tall man's flashlight beam swept dangerously close to Marcus's hiding spot. Check the substrate again. Sometimes they hide things in the gravel. Marcus watched them work with methodical precision, understanding dawning on him like a cold sunrise. These weren't street thugs. They moved with the practiced efficiency of professionals. Either the mob had sent their best, or someone else entirely had entered the hunt for the missing money. His phone vibrated silently against his ribs. Sarah's contact photo illuminated the screen, her smile a stark contrast to his current nightmare. He'd promised to call her yesterday, but how could he explain that he was hiding in an abandoned warehouse, watching dangerous men search for clues to stolen money? The call went to voicemail, and guilt gnawed at his stomach like acid. The sound of approaching vehicles outside froze everyone in the warehouse. Car doors slammed, followed by the rapid shuffle of multiple footsteps. The two men exchanged alarmed glances and killed their flashlights, plunging the space into absolute darkness. "You expecting company?" Joey's whisper carried clear across the concrete floor. "Shut up and move." Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows as a new group entered through the main entrance. Their voices carried the authority of law enforcement, but something felt off about their rhythm, their casual profanity. Dirty cops, maybe, or federal agents operating outside normal channels. "Sweep every corner," commanded a gravelly voice that seemed to come from a lifetime of cigarettes. If Castellano's information is accurate, there should be evidence here. Castellano. Marcus had heard that name whispered in the courthouse hallways during his reporting days, a mid-level crime boss who'd survived 3 separate indictments through a combination of smart lawyers and strategic amnesia. If Castellano was involved, the stakes had just multiplied exponentially. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as both groups became aware of each other's presence. Shouted warnings echoed off the concrete walls, followed by the metallic sound of weapons being drawn. Marcus remained frozen, realizing he was trapped between 2 potentially violent factions. "Federal agents!" someone shouted, though Marcus detected uncertainty in the declaration. "Drop your weapons!" "Like hell," came the Brooklyn accent's response. "We got here first." Marcus used the distraction to edge toward a broken window he'd spotted earlier. His foot caught a loose piece of debris, sending it skittering across the floor with a sound that might as well have been a gunshot in the tense silence that followed. Flashlight beams immediately converged on his position. He dove sideways as someone shouted, "There! Behind the boxes!" The next few seconds blurred together in a nightmare of running feet, shouted commands, and the crash of toppling storage containers. Marcus sprinted toward the window, glass crunching under his shoes as bullets sparked off the concrete wall inches from his head. His lungs burned as he dove through the opening, feeling shards slice through his jacket. He hit the alley pavement hard, rolling to absorb the impact before scrambling to his feet. Behind him, The warehouse had erupted into what sounded like a full-scale firefight. Muzzle flashes strobed through the broken windows, accompanied by the sharp crack of gunfire and shouted curses. Marcus ran without looking back, his mind racing faster than his feet. Whatever he'd stumbled into was bigger than simple mob money. The involvement of federal agents, real or fake, suggested connections that reached into the highest levels of organized crime and possibly law enforcement itself. 3 blocks away, gasping for breath in the doorway of a closed bodega, he pulled out his phone with shaking hands. The decoded coordinates seemed to burn through his jacket pocket, demanding action. But first, he needed to disappear completely. The hunters had multiplied, and staying ahead of them would require resources he didn't possess, unless he could find the money first. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the warehouse as Marcus dove behind a stack of crates, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vincent Torino's men had found him faster than he'd anticipated, and the safe house Tony had arranged was anything but safe. "I know you're in here, street rat," Vincent's voice carried across the cavernous space, smooth and deadly. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience." Marcus clutched the notebook containing the aquarium coordinates, his mind racing through possible escape routes. The warehouse had seemed perfect 12 hours ago, multiple exits, plenty of hiding spots, and supposedly unknown to Vincent's network. Now it felt like a tomb. Footsteps echoed from different directions, at least 3 men, maybe 4, spreading out to cut off his options. Marcus had learned to count threats during his years on the streets, a skill that had kept him alive when others hadn't been so fortunate. "The money belongs to my family," Vincent continued, his voice closer now. "My grandfather built this organization from nothing. Some vagrant doesn't get to waltz in and steal our legacy." Marcus peered around the crate. Vincent stood near the main entrance, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, flanked by 2 armed men. His remaining soldiers were moving systematically through the warehouse, checking every potential hiding spot. The homeless man's fingers found the burner phone Tony had given him. One missed call from Detective Sarah Chen, received 20 minutes ago while he'd been reviewing the notebook's cryptic entries. He'd been too focused on deciphering the aquarium clues to answer, but now he wondered if she'd been trying to warn him. A rat scurried across the floor near Marcus's position, and he held his breath as one of Vincent's men investigated the sound. The gunman was young, probably new to this kind of work, based on how he telegraphed his movements. Marcus waited until the man passed, then slipped deeper into the warehouse's maze of stored goods. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. Funny how hunger persisted even when death lurked nearby. The streets had taught him that survival meant paying attention to every physical need because you never knew when the next opportunity would come. "You're only making this harder on yourself," Vincent called out. "Give me the information and I'll make it quick. Keep running and I'll ensure you understand the meaning of suffering." Marcus found a narrow gap between 2 shipping containers and squeezed through, emerging near the warehouse's rear loading dock. The exit was 30 feet away, but crossing that distance meant exposing himself to gunfire. He needed a distraction. The notebook crinkled as he shifted position, and Marcus opened it to the page he'd been studying. The aquarium locations formed a pattern across the city, not random storage spots, but strategic positions that created a map. Each coordinate wasn't just hiding money, they were breadcrumbs leading to something larger. His revelation was interrupted by the sound of approaching sirens. Someone had called the police, though Marcus couldn't tell if that was good news or another complication. Vincent's family had connections throughout the city's power structure, including law enforcement. "Torino," a voice boomed through a bullhorn outside. "This is Detective Chen, NYPD. The building is surrounded." Vincent's curse echoed through the warehouse, followed by rapid conversation between him and his men. Marcus used the distraction to move closer to the loading dock, but froze when he heard Vincent's next words. "Burn it down. If we can't have the information, nobody can." The smell of gasoline reached Marcus's nostrils moments later. Vincent's men were dousing the warehouse's perimeter, preparing to trap him inside an inferno. The money's location would die with him, but Vincent apparently preferred that outcome to letting a homeless man profit from the theft. Marcus broke cover, sprinting toward the loading dock as flames began licking at the warehouse's edges. Gunshots erupted behind him, bullets splintering wooden crates and ricocheting off metal surfaces. His years of running, from police, from gangs, from life itself, had kept him in better shape than most people realized. He reached the loading dock as smoke began filling the air. The drop to the alley below was 12 feet, manageable if he rolled properly. But Vincent appeared at the far end of the platform, gun drawn and aimed directly at Marcus's chest. "End of the line," Vincent said, his voice calm despite the growing fire. "The notebook, please." Marcus looked at the flames spreading behind Vincent, then at the drop below him. Detective Chen's voice was shouting orders outside, but she wouldn't reach them in time. The notebook felt heavy in his hands, not because of its physical weight, but because of everything it represented. A chance to escape the streets forever, or fuel for Vincent's revenge. "You know what?" Marcus said, meeting Vincent's eyes. "I spent 3 years eating garbage and sleeping in doorways. What's a little more chaos?" He jumped backward off the loading dock, clutching the notebook as bullets whistled past his head. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, but Marcus forced himself to focus on the task ahead. He'd spent the last 2 hours meticulously checking every entrance and exit, mapping escape routes in his mind. The aquariums sat in a neat row on the concrete floor, their glass surfaces catching fragments of moonlight that filtered through broken windows high above. Sophia worked beside him in tense silence, her fingers tracing the etched coordinates with practiced precision. Each tank revealed another piece of the puzzle, longitude and latitude markings disguised as decorative elements, depths measurements hidden within fake coral formations. The mob had been clever, Marcus had to admit. Who would think to look for treasure maps inside discarded fish tanks? "This one's different," Sophia whispered, running her hand along the base of the largest aquarium. "The coordinates don't match any of the others. They're all pointing to different locations around the city." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Multiple locations? I thought we were looking for one big score." "So did I." Sophia pulled out her phone, cross-referencing the coordinates with mapping software. "But look at this, 5 different spots, all within a 10-mile radius, industrial areas mostly. Places where you could hide something substantial." A sound echoed through the warehouse, the distant clang of metal on metal. Marcus grabbed Sophia's arm, pulling her behind a stack of rotting wooden crates. They held their breath, listening. Footsteps, at least 3 sets, moving with military precision across the warehouse floor. "Check the perimeter," a gravelly voice commanded. "DeMarco wants every inch of this place swept clean." Marcus's blood turned to ice. They'd been found. Somehow, despite all his precautions, the mob had tracked them down. He glanced at the aquariums, calculating distances and angles. Could they reach them without being seen? Could they destroy the evidence before? "Boss! Over here!" Another voice called out. "Fresh footprints in the dust. 2 people, been here recently." Sophia's hand found Marcus's in the darkness, her grip tight with fear. Through gaps in the crates, they could see flashlight beams sweeping the space, growing closer with each passing second. The men moved with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was cornered. Marcus made a desperate decision. He picked up a chunk of broken concrete and hurled it toward the far end of the warehouse. The crash echoed through the space, drawing the flashlight beams away from their hiding spot. "There," the leader barked. "Move!" As footsteps thundered toward the distraction, Marcus and Sophia broke from cover, racing toward the aquariums. They had seconds before the men realized they'd been fooled. Marcus grabbed the smallest tank, the one containing the clearest coordinates, while Sophia snatched the notebook she'd been using to record the information. "Stop right there!" The shout came from behind them, followed immediately by the sharp crack of gunfire. Concrete exploded near Marcus's feet as he dove for the nearest exit, clutching the aquarium against his chest. Sophia was beside him, her face pale but determined, as they sprinted through a gap in the warehouse wall. More shots rang out, bullets whining off metal and stone. They ran through a maze of abandoned vehicles and industrial debris, using every scrap of cover they could find. Behind them, angry voices shouted orders, coordinating the pursuit. "The car!" Sophia gasped, pointing to where they'd hidden Marcus's battered sedan behind a collapsed loading dock. They reached it just as their pursuers emerged from the warehouse, flashlight beams stabbing through the darkness. Marcus gunned the engine, tires squealing as they fishtailed away from the warehouse complex. In the rearview mirror, he could see muzzle flashes as the gunman opened fire on their retreating vehicle. The rear window spider-webbed but held. "Where are we going?" Sophia asked, checking the aquarium for damage. Miraculously, it had survived their desperate escape intact. Marcus thought quickly. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere unexpected, the kind of place the mob wouldn't think to look for a homeless man with stolen coordinates to their missing fortune. "I know a place," he said, taking a hard right onto a residential street. "Someone who owes me a favor. But first we need to figure out what these coordinates actually point to." Sophia was already working on that, her phone's screen illuminating her focused expression. "According to this, the location from our aquarium is an old subway maintenance tunnel, abandoned since the 70s. Perfect place to hide something valuable," Marcus muttered, checking the mirrors again. No signs of pursuit, but he knew that wouldn't last long. Di Marco's people were persistent, and they had resources he couldn't match. As they drove through the sleeping city, Marcus felt the weight of their situation settling over him like a suffocating blanket. They had one piece of a 5-piece puzzle, and somewhere out there, the most dangerous criminals in the city were hunting them with murderous intent. But they also had something the mob didn't expect: nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a stack of wooden crates, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he watched Dimitri's men position themselves around the building's perimeter. Through a grimy window, he counted at least 6 figures moving with military precision, their weapons glinting under the pale streetlights. His phone buzzed with a text from Elena. 3 more cars just pulled up. Back exit compromised. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on him. The aquarium with the final coordinates sat 20 feet away, but it might as well have been on the moon. Between him and his only chance at survival stood enough firepower to level a city block. Detective Rodriguez's voice crackled through his earpiece. "We're in position, but I need 5 more minutes to get my team coordinated. Can you hold out?" "Do I have a choice?" Marcus whispered back, watching as one of Dimitri's men tested the side door's lock. The metallic click echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, his heart hammering against his ribs. 6 months ago, his biggest worry had been finding a dry place to sleep. Now he was playing cat and mouse with professional killers over more money than he could spend in 10 lifetimes. Footsteps crunched across broken glass somewhere to his left. Marcus held his breath, counting the seconds between each careful step. The beam of a flashlight swept across the wall above his head, casting dancing shadows that made his skin crawl. "Check the office," someone called out in accented English. He might be hiding the tank there. 2 sets of footsteps moved toward the back of the building. Marcus seized the moment, sliding along the wall toward the aquarium. His fingers found the glass surface, tracing the edges until he located the hidden compartment Elena had shown him how to find. Inside, a waterproof USB drive contained GPS coordinates to a storage facility in Queens, where Dimitri had hidden the bulk of his stolen fortune. The drive was smaller than his thumb, but holding it felt like grasping lightning. $120 million reduced to a piece of plastic and silicon that could disappear forever if he made a single mistake. "Movement in Sector 3, a voice called out from near the entrance. Marcus froze. He hadn't moved, which meant Rodriguez's people were making their approach. The warehouse erupted into chaos as shouts filled the air and bright lights suddenly flooded through the windows. Car doors slammed outside, followed by the distinctive whoop of police sirens. "NYPD, drop your weapons." Gunfire exploded through the warehouse, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly fireworks. Marcus threw himself to the floor as bullets shattered glass and splintered wood around him. The USB drive flew from his hand, skittering across the concrete into the darkness. "No!" he gasped, scrambling forward on his hands and knees as the firefight raged overhead. His fingers searched desperately through debris and broken glass, cutting his palms as he swept back and forth in the area where the drive had fallen. Each second felt like an hour as the battle intensified around him. Without those coordinates, Dmitri would never stop hunting him. The drive was his only bargaining chip, his only chance at buying his way out of this nightmare. A heavy boot stepped down inches from his face. Marcus looked up to see one of Dmitri's men standing over him, assault rifle pointed at his head. The man's face was a map of scars, his eyes cold as winter steel. Looking for this? The gunman held up the USB drive between two fingers. Marcus's blood turned to ice. "Please, You can die quietly," the man interrupted, his finger moving to the trigger. The sharp crack of a sniper rifle cut through the warehouse noise. The gunman's head snapped back and he collapsed, the USB drive spinning away into the shadows again. Through the confusion of smoke and shouting, Marcus saw Elena perched on a catwalk 20 feet above, rifle scope glinting in the strobing light. "Move!" she shouted down at him. Marcus dove for the drive, his fingers closing around it just as another of Dmitri's men rounded the corner. Rodriguez appeared behind the gunman like a ghost, pressing his service weapon against the man's neck. "NYPD, on the ground, now." The warehouse fell silent, except for the ringing in Marcus's ears. Slowly, he rose to his feet, the USB drive clutched in his bloody palm. Around him, Rodriguez's team was securing the remaining suspects while Elena climbed down from her elevated position. Marcus opened his hand, revealing the tiny device that had nearly cost him his life. $120 million, he said softly, "give or take." Rodriguez whistled low. "And you're sure you want to turn this over?" Marcus thought about sleeping in doorways, digging through dumpsters for food, being invisible to a world that had forgotten he existed. Then he thought about the bodies this money had already claimed. "I'm sure," he said. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Marcus crept through the shadows between towering shelves of forgotten belongings. His heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing the ticking clock in his head. Somewhere in this maze of storage units, Vincent Torino's men were closing in, and the aquarium coordinates he'd memorized were his only ticket to survival. Unit 847 sat in the back corner, its metal door slightly ajar. Marcus had wedged it open during his earlier reconnaissance, knowing he might need a quick escape route. The lock cutters felt heavy in his backpack, alongside the printed emails Detective Sarah Chen had given him, evidence of Torino's money laundering operation that could bring down half the city's corrupt elite. A car door slammed outside, then another. Marcus froze, pressing himself against the cold concrete wall. Through the grimy windows near the ceiling, headlight beams swept across the warehouse interior like searchlights hunting prey. They'd found him. "Check every unit," a gravelly voice commanded. "He's here somewhere." Marcus recognized the voice. Tommy the Wrench Castellano, Torino's enforcer. The man who'd earned his nickname by using tire irons to collect debts. Marcus had seen Tommy's handiwork before, back when he was still Detective Marcus Wells before the drinking and the disgrace and the long fall to the streets. Heavy footsteps echoed through the warehouse, splitting into different directions. Marcus counted at least 4 distinct gates, 4 armed killers between him and freedom. He slipped inside Unit 847, carefully closing the door behind him until only a sliver of light remained. The space reeked of mildew and neglect. Boxes of Christmas decorations sat next to a child's bicycle, someone's abandoned life gathering dust. Marcus moved deeper into the unit, his fingers finding the loose panel in the back wall he'd discovered hours earlier. The panel swung inward, revealing a narrow maintenance corridor that ran behind the storage units. Marcus had explored it during his planning phase, mapping potential escape routes like the cop he used to be. Old habits died hard, even when everything else had crumbled. A metallic screech echoed through the warehouse as someone pried open a storage door. "Nothing here," called a voice. "Keep looking," Tommy replied. "Boss wants this wrapped up clean." Marcus squeezed through the opening into the maintenance corridor. The space was barely 3 feet wide, lined with water pipes and electrical conduits. He moved carefully, placing each step to avoid the loose debris scattered across the floor. One wrong sound would bring them running. His phone vibrated against his chest. A text from Sarah, "Package delivered. Feds moving in 20 minutes. Stay alive. 20 minutes. He just had to survive 20 more minutes. A crash came from somewhere nearby. Storage unit doors being forced open with increasing urgency. They were working their way systematically through the warehouse. Marcus picked up his pace, following the maintenance corridor toward the loading dock at the far end of the building. "Found fresh footprints," someone shouted. "He was here recently." "Tommy, you need to see this," another voice called out. Marcus pressed his ear to the thin wall, separating him from the main warehouse floor. Through the metal sheeting, he could hear Tommy's heavy breathing just feet away. "Son of a bitch was watching us," Tommy growled. "Look at this setup. Empty food containers, blanket, perfect view of the entrance. He played us. What now, boss? Burn it down. All of it. He's hiding somewhere in here, and I'm done playing games." The smell of gasoline hit Marcus's nostrils almost immediately. These weren't just criminals. They were desperate ones, willing to commit arson to cover their tracks. The warehouse would become his crematorium if he didn't move fast. Marcus reached the end of the maintenance corridor, where a rusted emergency exit led to the loading dock. The door hadn't been opened in years, its hinges caked with rust and grime. He put his shoulder against it and pushed, praying the old mechanism would hold. The door gave way with a groan that seemed to echo through the entire building. "There!" Tommy's voice boomed. "Loading dock!" Gunshots erupted behind Marcus as he stumbled onto the concrete platform. Bullets sparked off metal pipes and shattered overhead light fixtures. He rolled behind a concrete pillar just as footsteps pounded through the warehouse toward his position. The first wisps of smoke began curling from the building's interior. Orange light flickered against the windows as the fire caught hold of cardboard boxes and wooden furniture. Tommy and his crew would have to choose between pursuing Marcus and escaping the inferno they'd created. Marcus sprinted across the loading dock toward the chain-link fence separating the warehouse from the adjoining rail yard. Behind him, the building groaned as flames spread through its interior. Somewhere in that growing conflagration, 3 aquariums held the secret that had started this nightmare. But Marcus no longer needed those coordinates. He carried something far more valuable now, the truth that would finally bring Vincent Torino's empire crashing down. The abandoned warehouse Tommy had chosen for the meeting reeked of rust and decay. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor where he'd positioned himself behind a stack of rotting pallets. His hands trembled as he checked his watch. 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until Kozlov arrived, expecting to find the aquarium with the real coordinates. What Kozlov would find instead was a carefully crafted replica Tommy had spent the last 6 hours perfecting. Using an identical tank he'd purchased from a pet store, he'd recreated the original's appearance down to the placement of fake coral and plastic plants. The crucial difference lay in the coordinates etched into the glass, numbers that would lead Kozlov's men to an empty field 30 miles outside the city. Tommy's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Sarah Chen, back up in position. "Remember, get him talking. We need evidence." The wire taped to his chest felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. One wrong move, one suspicious gesture, and he'd be dead before the police could reach him. But this was his only shot at ending the nightmare that had consumed his life since he'd opened that storage unit. Headlights swept across the warehouse entrance. Tommy's pulse hammered against his ribs as 3 black SUVs pulled up outside. Car doors slammed in rapid succession, followed by the crunch of footsteps on gravel. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, watching as armed figures filled the doorway. Viktor Kozlov entered like he owned the place, his expensive suit incongruous against the industrial decay. 4 bodyguards flanked him, their weapons visible beneath tailored jackets. Tommy recognized the giant from the motel, Dmitri, whose face still bore bruises from their previous encounter. "Mr. Morrison," Kozlov called out, his accented voice echoing off the walls. "I trust you've brought what belongs to me." Tommy stepped into the pale moonlight, the fake aquarium cradled in his arms. "It's here. But I want to see Maria first." Kozlov smiled coldly and gestured toward the entrance. 2 more men emerged, dragging a bound figure between them. Even in the dim light, Tommy could see Maria's face was swollen, her clothes torn. Rage burned in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "As you can see, your friend is alive," Kozlov said. "For now, the tank, please." Tommy set the aquarium on a nearby crate, his movements deliberate and slow. "Before we do this, I need to know something. How did you find out about the storage units in the first place?" Kozlov's eyes narrowed. "Curious, are we? Very well. My former associate, Vincent Carbone, thought he was clever hiding my money in those ridiculous fish tanks. He scattered them across dozens of storage facilities, thinking I'd never track them all down. But Vincent underestimated my patience. So you've been hunting them for years." 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, Kozlov replied with chilling precision. "We've recovered 11 of the 12 tanks. Each one contained coordinates leading to portions of my stolen fortune. Your little discovery was the final piece." Tommy nodded slowly, hoping the wire was picking up every word. "And Vincent? What happened to him?" "Poor Vincent learned that stealing from me is a terminal mistake." Kozlov stepped closer to the aquarium, his predatory gaze fixed on the tank. "But enough conversation. I have what I came for." As Kozlov leaned in to examine the coordinates, Tommy held his breath. The etched numbers looked authentic enough in the poor lighting, but would they pass closer scrutiny? "Dmitri," Kozlov commanded, "verify these coordinates on your phone." The giant pulled out a smartphone, his thick fingers pecking at the screen. Tommy's heart raced as precious seconds ticked by. If they discovered the deception now before the police moved in— "Looks like farmland," Dmitri reported. "Remote area, just like the others." Kozlov nodded approvingly. Vincent always preferred isolated locations. He straightened up, smoothing his jacket. "It appears you've kept your end of our bargain, Mr. Morrison. Now let Maria go." "Of course." But instead of signaling his men to release her, Kozlov drew a pistol from inside his coat. "However, I'm afraid I can't allow any loose ends." Tommy's blood turned to ice. "We had a deal." "Indeed we did. I promised she would live if you brought me the tank. I've upheld my part. She's alive at this very moment, but I made no guarantees about the future." The warehouse suddenly blazed with artificial light as police spotlights pierced the darkness. "LAPD! Drop your weapons!" Detective Chen's amplified voice boomed from outside. Chaos erupted. Kozlov's men scattered, shouting in Russian as they sought cover behind machinery and concrete pillars. Gunfire shattered the night air, muzzle flashes strobing like deadly lightning. Tommy dove behind the pallets as bullets splintered wood around him. Through the mayhem, he saw Maria being dragged deeper into the warehouse by one of Kozlov's men. The endgame had begun, and survival was no longer guaranteed for anyone. The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers, watching the silhouettes of Kozlov's men position themselves around the building's perimeter. Through his night vision scope, he counted at least 8 figures, each armed and moving with military precision. Sarah lay unconscious 20 yards away, zip-tied to a chair in the center of the warehouse floor. A single spotlight illuminated her like she was on stage, making her an easy target for anyone with a clear shot. Kozlov stood beside her, checking his watch with the casual indifference of a man waiting for a bus. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. The meeting time had arrived. He'd spent the last hour studying the warehouse layout, memorizing every exit, every piece of cover, every potential advantage. The building was a maze of industrial equipment and storage areas, but Kozlov had chosen the main floor deliberately. It was open, exposed, with limited hiding spots. A killing ground. Taking a deep breath, Marcus emerged from the shadows with his hands visible but ready. He'd left the real aquarium in his car 3 blocks away, bringing instead one of the decoy tanks he'd prepared. If this went sideways, the actual money would remain hidden. "Punctual," Kozlov called out as Marcus approached. "I appreciate that in a man." The Russian crime boss looked exactly as Marcus had imagined. Tall, lean, with silver hair and eyes like chips of ice. His expensive suit seemed incongruous in the industrial setting, but his presence commanded the space. "Let her go first," Marcus said, stopping 50 feet away. Kozlov smiled. "You're hardly in a position to make demands, but I admire your concern for the lady. Tell me, Mr. Chen, how does a homeless man develop such loyalty? Most people in your situation think only of themselves." Marcus kept his expression neutral. "Where I come from, you protect the people who matter." Touching. Kozlov's voice carried mockery, but his eyes remained calculating. "The aquarium. Show me." Marcus set down the tank he'd been carrying. Under the harsh light, the glass appeared to contain nothing but water and a few plastic plants. He'd chosen this particular decoy carefully. It looked appropriately aged and weathered. "Disappointing," Kozlov observed. "I was expecting something more substantial." "The money's not in the tank," Marcus said. "It's encoded in the serial numbers on the equipment inside. Each aquarium contains different coordinates and bank account information. You need all 7 to complete the picture." It was a lie, but a convincing one. Kozlov's organization had clearly done their homework on the original theft, but they didn't know the specific details of how Vincent Caruso had hidden the money. Kozlov gestured to one of his men, who stepped forward and examined the aquarium. The man shook his head slightly. "Mr. Chen, I'm going to assume you're not foolish enough to try to deceive me with a fake." Kozlov's tone remained conversational, but the threat was unmistakable. "However, I notice you've only brought 1 tank. Where are the other 6? "Safe," Marcus replied. "Hidden where your people will never find them. You get the rest when she walks out of here alive." "Alternatively," Kozlov said, drawing a pistol from his jacket, "I could simply kill you both and continue searching on my own. My people are quite thorough." The gun's barrel caught the light as Kozlov aimed it casually in Sarah's direction. She stirred slightly, beginning to regain consciousness. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. This was the moment everything could go wrong. "You've been searching for 3 months and found nothing. I located all 7 tanks in less than a week. You need me alive, perhaps. But I don't need her." Sarah's eyes fluttered open. Even bound and disoriented, she had enough awareness to remain silent, understanding instinctively that any sound might trigger violence. "The tanks are booby-trapped," Marcus said quickly. "Caruso was paranoid. He rigged them with acid baths that will destroy the information if they're opened incorrectly. Kill me, and you'll never access the money." Another lie, but Kozlov hesitated. Marcus pressed his advantage. "You want the full 120 million? Then we do this my way. She leaves, you get the first set of coordinates. Then we negotiate for the rest." Kozlov studied him for a long moment. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Mr. Chen." "I'm very desperate," Marcus replied honestly. "But I'm not suicidal. I want to live through this as much as you want your money." The Russian lowered his weapon slightly. "Very well. But understand, if you're playing games with me, I will make your death extraordinarily unpleasant." Marcus nodded toward Sarah. "Cut her loose." As Kozlov's man moved toward the chair, Marcus prepared himself for what came next. The real gamble wasn't the fake aquarium or the manufactured story about booby traps. The real gamble was whether Detective Morrison had received his message and positioned the SWAT team correctly. The warehouse felt like a tomb in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a stack of crates, his breathing shallow as he watched Volkov's men spread out through the cavernous space. Red laser dots danced across the walls like deadly fireflies, searching for him in the shadows. He'd led them here deliberately, using the burner phone to send coordinates that would bring them to this abandoned building on the outskirts of the industrial district. But now, surrounded and outnumbered, doubt crept into his mind like ice water through his veins. The aquarium sat 10 feet away, positioned exactly where he'd placed it an hour earlier. In the dim light filtering through grimy windows, it looked innocent enough, just another piece of discarded junk in a forgotten corner of the city. But Marcus knew better. Hidden within its false bottom lay the flash drive containing the complete financial records of Volkov's empire, along with detailed evidence of every crime, every murder, every transaction that had built the Russians' bloody kingdom. "I know you're here," Volkov's voice echoed through the warehouse, cultured and calm despite the circumstances. "You've proven quite resourceful. I'll give you that. But this ends now." Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, feeling the rough concrete scrape against his back. His phone buzzed once, a text from Detective Rivera confirming they were in position. Federal agents surrounded the building, but they needed Volkov to incriminate himself. Needed him to reveal the full scope of his operation before they could move. "You killed my friend," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Tommy never hurt anyone in his life." "Collateral damage," Volkov replied, his footsteps echoing as he moved closer. "Much like you will be if you don't surrender what belongs to me." "Funny thing about that money," Marcus said, shifting position as quietly as possible. "Turns out it never belonged to you in the first place. You stole it from pension funds, from working families who trusted you with their life savings." A harsh laugh bounced off the concrete walls. "Spare me the moral lecture. You think I care about those people? They were sheep waiting to be fleeced. I simply obliged them." Marcus smiled grimly in the darkness. The wire taped to his chest would be picking up every word. He needed to keep Volkov talking, needed him to confess to everything. What about Judge Harrison? Was he just a sheep too? "Harrison was a complication that required resolution," Volkov said, his voice closer now. "He developed an inconvenient conscience about our arrangement. Judges are supposed to stay bought, but apparently his price wasn't high enough." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Marcus knew Rivera and her team would be recording everything, building an airtight case with each word that spilled from the Russian's lips. A sudden crash echoed through the warehouse as one of Volkov's men knocked over a shelf. In the brief commotion that followed, Marcus saw his chance. He sprinted from his hiding place, diving behind another barrier as gunfire erupted around him. Bullets sparked off metal and shattered concrete, filling the air with deadly fragments. "Take him alive," Volkov shouted over the chaos. "I want to know what he's done with my money." Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out the device he'd prepared, a modified smoke grenade courtesy of Rivera's tactical team. He pulled the pin and rolled it across the floor, watching as thick white smoke began to pour out, obscuring everything in a dense fog. Using the cover, he moved toward the aquarium. His hands shook as he lifted it, feeling the weight of everything it contained. Not just money, but justice for Tommy, for Judge Harrison, for all the nameless victims of Volkov's greed. "The money's gone," Marcus called out through the smoke, his voice deliberately loud and clear. "I moved all 120 million to accounts that will distribute it back to your victims. Every pension fund you robbed, every life you destroyed, they're getting their money back." The warehouse fell silent, except for the hiss of the smoke grenade. Marcus could practically feel Volkov's rage radiating through the grey haze. "You think you've won?" The Russian's voice was tight with fury. "I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. I'll make you watch as I kill everyone you've ever cared about." "That's going to be difficult from federal prison," Marcus replied. The warehouse suddenly blazed with light as federal agents poured through every entrance. Shouts of "Federal agents" and "Drop your weapons" filled the air. Through the dissipating smoke, Marcus watched as Volkov's men found themselves surrounded, their laser sights now meaningless against overwhelming force. Marcus nodded, clutching the aquarium against his chest. The nightmare was finally over, but as he watched Volkov being led away in handcuffs, he knew the real work was just beginning. The abandoned warehouse reeked of rust and decay, but Marcus had run out of safe places to hide. 3 days had passed since he'd decoded the final aquarium, and the weight of $12 million in bearer bonds pressed against his ribs from inside his jacket. He'd already moved the remaining cash to safety deposit boxes across 3 different banks, but these bonds were too valuable to trust to anyone else. His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Kozlov's voice was calm, almost conversational. "We know you found our property. Return it and you walk away. Keep running and we'll find you anyway." Marcus ended the call and removed the battery. They'd found him twice already through cell tower triangulation. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Footsteps echoed from the warehouse entrance. Marcus pressed himself behind a stack of rotting pallets, heart hammering. Through gaps in the wood, he watched 3 figures move methodically through the shadows, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness like searching fingers. "Check the office," one whispered. "I'll take the loading dock." Marcus recognized the voice. Tommy Torino, one of Kozlov's lieutenants, the man who'd killed Eddie Chen in cold blood just for asking questions. Marcus had watched it happen from across the street, frozen in terror as Tommy put 2 bullets in Eddie's chest like he was swatting a fly. A rat scurried across Marcus's foot. He bit back a gasp, forcing himself to remain perfectly still. The bonds crinkled slightly against his chest, and he pressed his arm tighter to muffle the sound. "Nothing here," called another voice from the office. Tommy's flashlight swept closer to Marcus's hiding spot. 20 feet. 15. Marcus could see the gun in the man's other hand, finger resting casually on the trigger guard. 10 feet. The beam stopped just short of the pallets. Tommy stood motionless, listening. Marcus held his breath until his lungs burned, watching a bead of sweat roll down Tommy's neck. "False alarm," Tommy finally muttered, moving toward the back of the warehouse. Marcus waited another 10 minutes before sliding deeper into the shadows. He knew this building from his homeless days. There was a loose panel in the basement that led to the old steam tunnels. If he could reach it without being seen, he might have a chance. The basement stairs creaked under his weight despite his careful steps. Behind him, voices echoed as the search continued above. Marcus fumbled in the darkness until his fingers found the familiar loose panel. It scraped against concrete as he pried it open. The tunnel beyond was a nightmare of cobwebs and stagnant water, but it was freedom. Marcus squeezed through the opening just as footsteps thundered down the basement stairs. He was here, still warm behind these pallets. Marcus crawled frantically through the narrow passage, splashing through puddles that soaked his knees. The tunnel stretched for 2 blocks before emerging in the basement of an abandoned department store. He'd used this escape route twice before when rival homeless camps had turned violent. Above ground, dawn was breaking over the city. Marcus kept his head down, just another homeless man shambling through the early morning streets. But inside his jacket, the bonds felt like they weighed 1,000 pounds. $12 million, enough to disappear forever, to start over somewhere Kozlov and his men would never find him. But first, he had to survive long enough to cash them. His destination was a pawn shop in Chinatown, run by an old woman named Mrs. Liu, who asked no questions and had connections to private collectors who dealt in bearer bonds. Marcus had done his research during 3 sleepless nights in public libraries, learning about the underground market for untraceable securities. The shop was tucked between a dim sum restaurant and a traditional medicine store. Marcus circled the block twice, watching for anyone who looked out of place. A businessman checking his phone too often, a woman reading the same newspaper page for 10 minutes. But the street seemed normal. Mrs. Liu was ancient and sharp-eyed, her wrinkled hands steady as she examined the first bond under a jeweler's loupe. "Authentic," she said in accented English. "Very old, very valuable, also very dangerous. Can you move them?" "Half, today. Other half, maybe 1 week." Marcus nodded. 6 million now was better than 12 million never. What percentage? 75. You take cash, I take risk. It was highway robbery, but Marcus had no leverage. Deal. As Mrs. Liu prepared the transaction, Marcus watched the street through grimy windows. Somewhere out there, Kozlov's men were still hunting. They'd killed Eddie Chen for asking questions. They'd killed Sarah Martinez for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. They'd kill Marcus without hesitation if they found him. But for the first time in days, Marcus felt something other than fear. He felt hope. In a few hours, he'd have enough money to disappear completely. He just had to stay alive that long. The warehouse trembled as another explosion echoed from the east wing. Marcus pressed his back against the concrete wall, clutching the final piece of the aquarium cipher, a small ceramic castle that had seemed so innocent just hours ago. His hands shook as he traced the tiny numbers etched into its base, the coordinates that would lead Kozlov's men to the $120 million that had started this nightmare. Detective Sarah Chen's voice crackled through the walkie-talkie clipped to his jacket. "Marcus, we've got movement on the north entrance. 3 vehicles, heavily armed. You need to get out of there now." But Marcus couldn't move. Not yet. Somewhere in this maze of storage units, Tommy was still alive. He had to be. The kid had risked everything to help him, and Marcus wouldn't abandon him the way the world had abandoned Marcus all those years ago. "I'm not leaving without Tommy," he whispered into the radio. "Damn it, Marcus. This isn't about heroics anymore. Kozlov's entire organization is converging on your location." The sound of boots echoed through the corridor. Marcus ducked low, peering around the corner to see 4 men in dark suits moving methodically from unit to unit, kicking down doors with military precision. The lead man barked orders in Russian, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to violence. Marcus recognized him from the photographs Chen had shown him. Viktor Petrov, Kozlov's lieutenant and the man who'd orchestrated the original heist 3 years ago. The same man who'd killed at least 6 people trying to recover this money. A muffled cry came from Unit 247, 50 feet down the corridor. Tommy. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decision. He could slip out the back exit, disappear into the city with Chen's protection, and start over somewhere far from here. The ceramic castle in his hand was worthless without the other pieces, which were safely in police custody. Kozlov's money would remain hidden forever. But Tommy's terrified voice called out again, and Marcus found himself moving before conscious thought took hold. He pulled the fire alarm. Piercing sirens filled the warehouse as emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. The Russian voices grew agitated, and Marcus used the chaos to sprint toward Unit 247. He reached the door just as Petrov emerged, dragging a bloodied Tommy by the collar. "Let him go," Marcus said, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Petrov smiled, revealing gold teeth. "The homeless man with $120 million secret. You've caused us considerable trouble. The money's gone. The police have everything they need." "Perhaps, but you still have value." Petrov pressed a gun to Tommy's temple. "The final piece, yes? The coordinates? Give it to me and the boy lives." Marcus felt the ceramic castle's sharp edges cutting into his palm. "How do I know you'll keep your word?" "You don't." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, real ones this time, not just the warehouse alarm. Chen had kept her promise about backup. But they wouldn't arrive in time. Tommy met Marcus's eyes, and in that moment, Marcus saw something he recognized, the desperate calculation of someone with nothing left to lose. Tommy gave an almost imperceptible nod. Marcus threw the ceramic castle high into the air. As Petrov's attention followed the arc of the flying object, Tommy drove his elbow hard into the man's ribs and broke free. Marcus tackled Petrov around the waist, and they crashed into the storage unit's metal door frame. The gun went off. Pain exploded through Marcus's shoulder, but adrenaline kept him moving. He and Tommy ran toward the exit as more gunshots rang out behind them. The warehouse filled with smoke as something electrical caught fire, and Marcus could hear Chen's voice shouting orders through a bullhorn outside. They burst through the emergency exit into the cold night air, where a dozen police cars waited with lights flashing. Chen grabbed Marcus as he stumbled, pressing her hand against his wounded shoulder. "The ceramic piece," Marcus gasped. "Doesn't matter," Chen said. "We found the money an hour ago. Your cipher led us right to it." Marcus stared at her in confusion. "But I never told you." "Tommy did. Smart kid figured out the pattern and called it in while you were playing hero." As paramedics loaded Marcus into an ambulance, he watched the warehouse burn. Through the smoke and flames, he could see Petrov and his men being led away in handcuffs. It was over. Tommy climbed into the ambulance beside him, sporting a black eye but grinning widely. "So what happens now?" Marcus thought about the reward money Chen had mentioned, about the apartment they could afford, about Tommy finishing school and maybe even college, about second chances and the strange paths that led from desperation to hope. "Now we figure out what comes next," Marcus said, finally allowing himself to believe it might actually be something good.